I apologize if the camera's rolling.
I just started them.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm calling this meeting to order. I would like to thank everyone for coming to tonight's special meeting. I want to begin by clarifying the purpose of tonight's meeting. While the school board doesn't have direct authority over any kind of leasing or sale information on school buildings, the responsibility rests with the city. We do have a critical responsibility to understand and respond as it pertains to the uses of our students, facilities, families, and district as a whole. This meeting was called in direct response to a volume of public interest, questions from community members, and concerns raised by educators and elected officials regarding enrollment trends, facility planning, and the future of Carr G. Laurel Elementary School. So I would love for the clerk to call the roll. Madam Clerk.
Julia Mendoza. Present. Angel Newman. Present. Jenny Mercado. Present. Nineteen Hindu.
Present.
Tyrell Stevens.
Present.
Michelle Fox.
Present.
Corey Jones.
Present.
Melissa Hughes.
Present.
And Stephen Williamson. He is present. You have a point.
Thank you. So the first item on tonight is, so really quick, before we take a motion to approve the agenda, I want to move two items. One of the items I want to move was requested by our legal counsel. Which is the Preparing for Change, which is the federal education shifts of local implications. I want to shift that. And then also a presentation, which is item 4.1 on Excel Academy Charter Schools vision and for community and building information. I want to move that to the next meeting. Tonight, I want to focus directly on item 4.2, which is the facility update regarding swing space usage at Carr G. Laurel. Do I have a motion to approve that agenda? Motion been made by Chairman Mahingable, seconded by Dr. Williamson. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Any noes or abstentions? There you have it. Items 4.2, presentation on the usage of Carr G. Laurel. I'd like to call up members from the district.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to be back. Zach Scott, Deputy Superintendent of Operations, and joined by Scott Sullivan, our Chief of Staff. I believe we have a presentation here as well. And so I'm happy to go through it. I will share a few things up front, and just to reiterate what President Stevens mentioned is that the lease of the building is not something that the school district is a part of, so I'm not going to be able to answer questions necessarily related to that, but happy to answer questions related to our swing space planning, some of the engagement we've done, and some high-level enrollment trends. I think we've as I'll share, a number of these items have been shared in prior years, and we've tried to update where we have. A lot of this work, and particularly detailed enrollment analysis, takes some time, and so this was a meeting that was noticed just a few days ago. So we haven't, we're able to answer many of the questions that were put forward, some of which we can answer at a future date, just because of the timeline to put this presentation together. So I'll first talk. There was some inquiry around enrollment, and what you'll see, what I'll talk through is both some expected trends as well as some understanding of the mechanics of enrollment in the district. And then I will go into more depth on facilities and swing space planning and engagement. So here's something, and this was shared, and I tried to note where we shared a lot of this before, but this was something we shared in City Council last year as we were talking about phase 4 in construction, and about, one of the important things we do as we plan for future construction is looking at both the students we have in front of us today, but also our expected student body in the future. We want to make sure we build enough buildings to support all of our students, but the more buildings, the more open seats you have, you then are spending funding on buildings, services, and staff for students who aren't there. So we want to make sure we have the appropriate number of buildings and students as we plan for the future. So what you'll see here is our current enrollment, which is, as of this October, was 19,563. That is less times 2. So we pull our enrollment number that it typically includes times 2, but while they are a district charter school, they are not kind of under our direct control. And that corresponds to a building capacity of roughly 21,000 seats. And that is actually lower than it was several years ago as we've taken several schools offline. So that includes some capacity we've already reduced. Over time, we do anticipate enrollment to decline in the district, creating a larger gap between current capacity and the current number of students. One of the main drivers of this is that we have that the incoming class of kindergartners is typically a fair bit smaller than our exiting class of 12th graders. So over time, even without any changes to charters, demographics, other things, just the natural kind of matriculation of our students leads to enrollment declines. That's the number you see here. So I think it's helpful to illustrate what that is for this coming year. So in terms of the number of 12th graders, we have roughly 17 or close to 1,800 students. At the same time, our kindergarten class is roughly 1,300 students. So a lot of ins and outs here when you think, but if you roughly think of your kindergarten through 11th graders moving up, and that body stays the same, if the number of students then leaving the system as 12th graders is around 1,800 and the number coming in is 1,300, you see a reduction in this case of around 500 students. So just through the natural growth of having smaller classes at our earlier grades, we will see enrollment declines over time. So I'm happy to, I know there were questions on enrollment. I'm happy to, this was kind of our overview of the kind of major trends that we anticipate for the coming year. But I'm happy to answer questions on that before we dive more into swim space. And I'll do my best, some of which we can answer tonight, some of which we can bring back at future meetings.
Ms. Maple?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick question. You mentioned that the district lost about 4,000 students. So how much that is an army are we talking about?
So we've lost about, since the FY20, I think we had closer to 23,000 students, so about 3,000 students over that time. So what was your question, the number of students?
How much are you on?
So
I'm trying to figure out because earlier also in the presentation, you mentioned that the funds also for the students wherever they go. So I'm trying to figure out like how much money the districts can be losing to keep losing students on this way.
yeah, I mean, so there's multiple ways you can look at it. So since, I guess one thing when we look backwards, our state aid has actually gone up since that time. So even though the number of students has gone down, the amount for people has gone up. If you're talking about moving forward, like roughly how much we get per student, and I might ask Mr. Petit. How much?
10,000 state.
10,000 in state aid plus the success factor is a plus programs.
I'd say with CPI, probably $10,000 to $12,000 per student.
Yeah, $10,000 to $12,000 per student, and then we have a portion of our municipal aid that we receive from the city that goes out, and I think that's around $4,000 per people. So the foregone revenue is $10,000 or $12,000 per student, and then another $4,000 per 4,000 in terms of if a student attends another school in Providence, a charter school, that goes through.
Ms. Hughes?
To be clear, this doesn't necessarily mean the same number of children exist in Providence of this age. It's that there have been birth rate declines as well. Like, can you touch on that? Because I think there's perhaps a conception here that this means that there are the same number of students in Providence, but they're just making other choices. That may be partially true, but what other factors are playing in here?
Yeah, so a couple factors. So one is students attending schools of choice, so whether that's a charter school, the Met Davies, a CTE program in another district, that is a part of it. But we have seen fewer kindergarten students, so there's been, and this is not a trend that is unique to Providence or frankly Rhode Island, but a nationwide trend where there's been demographic declines in birth rates. And I think there was also a unique time, and unfortunately, it remains to be seen what lies ahead in the future years. But during COVID, as a district, we're fortunate in that we often have students that come from out of state or out of country, often in the middle of the year, and that helps. It is great for a number of reasons, one of which is it supports enrollment in the district. But during COVID, when there was less incoming immigration to Rhode Island, we actually saw it wasn't. I think an important note is it's not when we see declines in enrollment, it is not a kid that is here today and then gone tomorrow. It is often a student that was born or a student that didn't come from another place that we had in prior years. So we have seen that number post-COVID pick up. But again, I think we're all watching it closely given some of the unfortunate what happenings at the federal level, like what that means for immigration and other things that impact our enrollment.
Dr. Williams?
So is there any way with the data that we have available to parse out how much of this is being driven from demographic changes and how much of it is being driven from students opting out of the public school system? Because I feel like, just the reason I'm curious about that is I feel like we can't do very much about the former. We might be able to do something about the latter by making the schools more attractive.
Yeah, so we can do that. So you can certainly look at, there's public information on, and we can pull this and share this at our next meeting. You have enrollment in Providence schools, enrollment in private schools, enrollment in Met, enrollment in charters. So you can see how that changes over time. And I think the top line number goes down slightly to all students, but there's also obviously a change in where students go among that. But that is information we can pull together.
Thank you.
Vice President Newman?
Hi, thank you so much. I have a question just about, maybe this is coming, but is there a certain that is sort of converts pure people to square footage of space that's needed in the district to accommodate each student?
So we think of that in terms of capacity. So every building has how many students they could hold. And sometimes you look at square footage, and other times, typically what you'll do is count the number of classrooms that are of a certain size, and multiply that by the number of students you can get. So capacity is one way to look at it. It can be, our historical data here isn't always great, particularly as buildings have been used for different reasons or different spaces that were once classrooms have been converted into something else. But typically we go into a building, look at the number of classrooms and multiply that by the number of students you could have in each class.
Okay, and I'm sorry, one more follow-up to that. This may be way too nitty-gritty, but does that take into account how classrooms are being set up differently too? So you could pack more kids in a class if they're in rows, but I know there's been an effort to make classrooms more comfortable, circles, things like that. Does any of that sort of play into how much space is needed? And it's okay if we don't have the answers, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I'll say a few things. Our class sizes, which are outlined in our PQ contract 1 to 26, those haven't changed. Those have been pretty consistent. So it's not that over time we've had even rooms might be more closer to that 26, but it's not like we've been adding students necessarily to classrooms. I will say that, the reality is many of our facilities are what they are. So there's only so much we can do to change spaces to make them more conducive. I like to think during construction, that is where we have a lot broader brush to make sure those spaces are built. And I welcome, for those of you who haven't, go to check out some of our newly built schools where they can use space a lot better. But many of our buildings were built long ago, where it is, like you said, straight rows, and we know that's not typically how we want classrooms to function today.
Any other questions? All right, I have a couple. I want to read it, make sure I catch it all. So according to the report in 2024, the interim report on student achievement by the Harvard Graduate School of Education, published by RIE, PTSD has seen a significant enrollment decline, as you mentioned, losing approximately 2,000 students, close to 3,000 students actually, between 2019 and 2023. I believe now it could be close to 4,000. To charter schools, private schools, maybe homeschooling. If the city moves forward with leasing Kaji Laura to Excel, does PPSD have an estimate of how many additional students might leave the district, adding to the nearly 4,000 students that had already departed since 2019?
Don't have an exact estimate. I would say, the Excel Academy is a approved charter school, so those, we kind of have to plan for when seats are approved, regardless of whether they have space or not. We need to plan for it. So, we can look at what the level of approved seats are and what that would mean for Providence, but I don't believe it's opening. My understanding is it's not opening next year, so it wouldn't impact our planning for next year, but potentially could in future years.
All right, I believe Dr. Williamson had asked a question about, a breakdown, because I know we lost nearly 20%. There was an enrollment drop since the state takeover. So I want to know, is there going to be, do we have a chance to get that breakdown, and what could be possibly the timeline of that breakdown?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is publicly available in terms of enrollment by municipalities. So that is something there's historical information we can pull from RISE's website and share.
Perfect. When can you get that to the board?
I would assume it's relatively straightforward. I haven't pulled that data recently, so we can follow up about the timeline, but I don't think it would be incredibly long. It might be something, frankly, like everyone has public access to, that could pull it, but we can also, we don't have any extra access to that information than other people, so.
How many students have been approved for homeschooling in each of the last 4 years?
I don't have that figure. I will say, and that is a requirement under state law, so we don't have a choice of whether to approve or not, but our team can pull that information on the number that have been approved.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was last November. It could have been December, but I know the school board last meeting hadn't met in a couple of months. Since then, that was something I had requested from Mr. Catone. We can just follow up on that. Just two more questions pertaining to enrollment. What was PPSD's original plans for Kaji Laurel building? What was the original plan for that building? If you could break that down for me.
When you say the original.
Because I know we was using it as a swing space, but I didn't know was it, we was gonna put another school there, or was it just gonna be a semester the entire time?
Yeah, so, and that's part of the next presentation, but, or next part of the presentation, but
Okay.
we plan to use it as swing space for a semester while construction's done, and then likely for another school after a semester rotates out, that another school would enter.
Okay, let's wait until the next part. Does anyone have any questions about enrollment? You have 4 minutes? Okay, let's move.
All right, so hopefully much of this should be familiar to many in the board or in the audience, but what you'll see here is some of our latest around school construction. And so what you see here is not the full set of projects. This is just phase 4, so we can give you the full list, but this includes the last round of projects. Again, I think construction is hard, but I don't want to lose track of how exciting and important this is as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for students in the city, from a place where we've, what I like to think, capital plans often feel very far away, and this plan felt very far away when we started, but we are now have 4 or 5 schools under our belt in terms of opening, which is extremely exciting. And we also have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make that happen in the future. That really requires a lot of careful planning, both for swing space and otherwise, because without swing space, it is really hard to do this work in a way that doesn't disrupt student learning and in a way that maximizes kind of the dollar you have, because as great as the renovation cost goal has been, it's one that took a lot of time, a lot of patience from staff and families, and so the more we can utilize swing space, better. So to talk about a little bit about the engagement we've had around swing space, so we shared preliminary recommendations on swing space plans for the coming years, and I'll detail what those are on the next slide. We shared that with our school building committee in August, and then with this school board in September. And at that time, we knew there were several options we could pursue that we would need to vet further. And so that's exactly what we did. In September and October, we held, in conjunction with our city council partners, many meetings, as well as meetings at PTOs and with families. One of the options which we'll talk through was about potential mergers and relocations around Hopkins and Kazarian. So we had some more intensive meetings with faculty and families at those schools. To tie into our budget presentation, schedules make a huge difference. So we then did the kind of painstaking effort of doing kind of classroom by classroom reviews, scheduling reviews to make sure we could adequately fit schools in swing space during this time of relocation. And then the city put out an RFP to support renovation work at Hopkins to support, and Laura to support renovations at those schools. We were fortunate, thanks to the voters of Providence, that phase 4 bond was passed in November. And so at that time, the planning became a lot more real. And then we came back in December to share our refined recommendations with this school board about, based on our initial plans in the fall, what we then learned through engagement, what, if any, we had in terms of changes to our swing space plan. So the next two slides detail two kind of paths for swing space, potential options for swing space that we shared with the board in September. One was utilizing half of Laura, and the other was using the full building. And what you'll see here is largely what we're doing next year, and I'll share the one tweak, which was the co-location of Kennedy rather than the merger of Hopkins and Kazarian. But I think what's most important here is to focus on the next few years where we have the greatest clarity. There's a lot more vetting to do in these further out years, but this was one path with the swing space we have available, which includes Narducci, currently occupied by Kazarian, Laurel Hill, currently occupied by Fogarty, and then the potential for Hopkins to serve as a temporary location, as well as Lima once that is moved into a renovated building on the site of Gilbert Stewart, as well as one half of the Laurel building. This next option, you'll see, is actually very similar in terms of the ability to service schools and to swing space. This assumes that this plan had two options utilizing two sides of Laurel, but it's roughly the same. We're able to do the same amount of work with a few tweaks. For those of you who don't know, and I not to overstep this, but Laurel is a building that has essentially two wings of roughly 28 to 30 classrooms on each side. It served as co-location space several years ago when we had William Debate in one half of the building and the remaining Carl Laurel in the other half. So between these two options, one of the things we learned as we went out to RFP for the construction work, or the city went out to RFP for the construction work, is that one side of the building has a much fewer need for repairs, and that's the site to be occupied by a semester. And that was because work had been done in a prior year to support the co-location of William Debate while it was in swing space. The other half of the building had a significant amount more work that would be done. And so to bring that other side on would take a significant investment from the district, which we would have to pull from future construction projects. So given the options we saw, we felt that the kind of one half of Laurel option was adequate. Again, this was options that we had shared throughout the fall with this body, with the school building committee, and with our faculty. So we ultimately then moved forward with the swing space plan we have for next year, which is a semester, and this is from our school building committee meeting in January. This is from our a semester would locate the portion of the Carl Laurel building. If you're facing the building, it's on the left-hand side. Again, the one most recently renovated for William Debate. Robert F. Kennedy will co-locate with Hopkins Middle School, as that building, Hopkins Middle School does not take a sixth grade next year, and then ultimately will phase out over time. But Kennedy will be co-located at the Hopkins building for 2 years before then rotating out into their newly built pre-K-8 school. I'm happy to talk through any of that. The next section is to talk through some more of the engagement we've done around this work, but I'm happy to answer any questions folks had on that student space planning document.
Any questions? Ms. Hughes?
So just to be crystal clear on this, on slide 8, which we saw previously at the September 2024 school board meeting, and if folks were not with us yet then, or for the public, we can go back and look at those materials on the electronic school board platform. We would be able to see that full presentation, as well as on our YouTube video archive. This plan, using half of Lauro, the only plans for this option were to use half of Lauro for Messer for school years 26 and 27, and that is still our current plan.
So I think in the out years, we may want to consider, so there's projects you see like at in the 27, 28 year that we consider moving into Lauro. Some of that's going to be, this was one option, but you could just as easily, instead of having Barton in Hopkins, that you could have that at Lauro. So those are decisions. This was one path, but there's permutations within this based on the size of the school, the location of the school and the noise.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm just trying to understand like how, like, it looks like likely Green would stay at Narducci on this timeline because of the capacity.
That's right.
But it would be the question around potentially Barton or other projects.
That's right.
Any other questions? I have a question. How much money are we spending to make Kennedy accessible at Hopkins?
I can get the exact scope, and it's the one, it's not the district doesn't spend money, it's through the bond funding from the city. I can get the exact figure, but Hopkins, if I recall, has an elevator in it, so it's accessible. They're building some ramps on the ground level to the back, but in many ways, I think it is accessible in terms of, double check, but has an elevator for handicap accessibility.
Okay. Was some of that space, like some of the money that we're going to be potentially using, was it ever an option to sort of use that other wing of Kaji Laurel, that money for that space to sort of upgrade it for potential, Kennedy at that facility merged in with Asa Mesa?
We hadn't really considered that, in part because we thought we had adequate space with Hopkins, and so I guess a couple things to mention there is that side of the Laura building requires a significant amount of work to be done. So there's a financial cost that we would need, that the city would need to pull from other projects to support school construction, but it would also mean we would be having multiple buildings online. So there's not only a cost to rehab, but we are then heating, cleaning, staffing multiple buildings. But over time, we believe we actually, based on the enrollment information we shared earlier, we don't need as many buildings. So that would have come at a greater expense to the district, not just in terms of construction costs, but also ongoing kind of maintenance and management costs.
Okay, all right. Because I don't want to get into like anything with the lease details, so I don't want to talk too much about that. Okay. Yes, Secretary Ponce.
Just for clarity, so I know you didn't want to get into the lease stuff, but I do have a question. So Excel leasing that side of the building, that money that they're paying to rent, does any of that go to PBSD schools, or does that go straight to? And then you can answer that.
Yeah, I would defer to the city on the outline of that lease.
Is there anyone from the city who can answer that? Okay.
Okay, yeah, really quick before I get, I before we begin with you. Can we turn the AC off up there with the cold? I appreciate that. Chairman Jones and then Vice President Newman.
I just wanted to ask, Jeff can't answer questions tonight?
Well, specific with, regarding the lease. So what was noticed for this meeting was this presentation, but not the lease. So I think that if you want to talk about the lease agreement, you'd have to properly notice that on the agenda and then request the appropriate representatives from the city to talk about it. But even if they were here, it would not be appropriate based on what the agenda is.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Vice President Newman.
Well, you can tell me if this is out of bounds, and I think I'm just gonna ask anyway. So I guess my question is, yeah, lease aside, but I mean, it directly impacts Providence students. Is there any concern from PPSD's side that lease is set for a term of almost up to 65 years? Like, and I guess I'll add with that maybe a little bit of my concern, which is it's not research, so it's just literally just a concern that I want to learn more about. You know, I know we've had a decrease in enrollment due to, it sounds like, birth rates, charter schools. We don't know what's going to happen with immigration federally. I guess I just wonder, I'll reframe the question, like, does the city have goals to increase enrollment over time? And if so, would a 65-year lease of one of the buildings that we've been using pose an issue to that goal?
So I can't speak to the lease, not having, been negotiated. We're not necessarily a party to it. What I will say is that certainly the district cares deeply about, educating the students we have, and as many students, we want to be the destination for education in Providence. So I will say, and hopefully it showed on that first slide, is like, as we see, we do project enrollment declines, we have more seats than we have students. And so even if that number were to rise, we would we believe adequate seats. Over time, if that number continues to go down, like, to be candid, in future years, we'll have to make some tough decisions collectively about what that means for the portfolio of the district. But I'm not concerned about having not enough seats for students, given what that is. So so that I can speak from the district's perspective, not as it pertains to the Laurel specifically.
Chairman Jones and Dr. Wentz.
So my question is, has the school district considered other ways that building could be useful for the student population? So, an example would be, I know that the governor is giving out money to cities for the municipal learning centers, right? Or, expanding some of our CTE programs, or, I know that some schools don't have gyms, or they have gyms, they don't have outside, rec area, or, anything of that nature that the school district was able to consider after the school was decided to be shut down? Or where does the line kind of draw on, the district's involvement in that decision making?
Yeah, I mean, what I can share is when we think of the Laurel building, and this goes to some of the reasons why the decision was made to close that school earlier, is it is in it was severely under enrolled. It was less than 50% at less than 50% capacity, and that is in part due to where it's located, and it's in a part of the city where there are a tremendous amount of students, and given the other schools that are not that far off, a semester and others, that was serving a number of students that lived in that area. It is a old building, so it is certainly we feel perfectly safe, and we're putting more money into it for swing space. But it is not something that, if you wanted to redo all the air conditioning and things like that, that is a significant investment to get it back up to a place if we were to keep it in our portfolio long term. It is, for those of you who've been there, there's not green space around it. And so there's a number of reasons why long-term, kind of the district made the choice that it wasn't to keep in the district. So we frankly didn't spend a ton of time of thinking about it for other uses because, again, those uses would come with both facilities costs as well as ongoing maintenance costs that, we'd have to find elsewhere we'd have to pull from funding from elsewhere to cover. So.
And I also argue that, or find private partners, right? I know that at my department, on my day job, there's a huge initiative with like junior achievement and some of the folks at the table to build, I think it's called it's like a business expo almost, where kids can go and they can, they can kind of simulate what it's like to work in the real world. They can, it's almost like a quick career exploration opportunity. And, there's a bunch of synergy with private entities and other state agencies about a project like that. That's just one project in my purview that, they are using private investors as well as, state partners to kind of try to lift that up. The biggest issue was the space, finding a space that's, connected to young people or in a good area with enough square footage. So I think that there's always an opportunity to kind of explore those things, and maybe that's something that we can change in the future is, let's evaluate every opportunity the district could utilize and partners we could leverage with before, handing off one of our assets.
Really quick, Dr. Wilson, if I get to you. So it's tied into Chairman Jones's question. Has PPSD, established or considered establishing a therapeutic school? Because we do spend, in fact, $10 million in out-of-district costs. And would that be a potential space? If so, because we do spend a significant amount of money.
Yeah, I would say on like a therapeutic school, that is it's
like social, emotional, behavioral, things like that.
Yeah, I'd say so. A couple things there is part of the challenge there is not only space that we found, it's honestly staff. And so there, the more you could have a building, and we are still, particularly in our high need areas, struggling to find staff. And so that would be a concern about, half the challenge that we face with our opening something like that would be having adequate staff. Again, it would be a significant investment to keep another school, and we can get some exact figures, but to heat, to clean a full school building year round is a lot. Like you have to really make sure you can fully staff it, fully run it in a way that makes sense both for students, but also financially. I mean, I think we're trying to do that in other ways as we think through the use of Branch Avenue, which is where A Venture is, and how that we are using space we have at 379 Washington to support many of our students who are overage, undercredited, and trying to use more space at A Venture to support students who are either in a space where they are need to take a moment out of their kind of a traditional school to be supported before they can come back, rather than going out of district, and that's what we're trying to do with greater supports at A Venture. But
I can build off of Zach there for a moment, give him a break.
So definitely Zach's wheelhouse, but scheduling of the buildings and programs sometimes falls a little more on the teaching and learning side. But with, for example, classical for next year, we're able to bring 2 different SEL programs back. One's a transition program that was housed at on the Federal Hill House. And we're bringing those students in that program to classical for the first time ever. So that's a big round of applause for Sandy. And we bring in more ECS students back to like Central, Hope, JSEC, where we actually have programming for the students. So we're pulling them out of Branch and looking how we're utilizing grants moving forward and on new redesign phases as well. So we have 4 programs going back into the comprehensive high schools, taking part of the new C-Tech programs, et cetera. So it's exciting for next year.
Absolutely. And that's definitely good. I think, in other places, they have specific programs for specific students. And sometimes, putting some of our students with behavioral issues in, schools with, students that may have less behavioral issues, I think could, sort of affect their learning environment. There was a time I was in school and someone had made a recommendation for the students to eat without the rest of their peers there, and it caused a lot of confusion. There was a lot of, what did the teacher sign? Grievances. There was a lot of grievances pertaining to that, and I understood that. but sometimes having them in their own environment could be beneficial.
Yeah, 1000%. We spent a lot of time this year looking at out-of-district students. Not only does it, is it a large cost for our district to place students out of district, but even at branches here, we're able to bring some of our tier 3 students back from out of district into a tier 3 program because we had additional space in our schools with new construction to bring the ECS students who can be mainstreamed in our comprehensive high schools. Those students that were put out because they weren't able to be mainstreamed are now having a more of a tier 3 SEL focus at branch. So, for example, our grade 8 students that could not participate in our BIT programming and had to go out of district are now going to be part of the programming at Branch F for next year because we do have space in that school for tier 3 now because we're able to broaden the experiences of our ECS students or create a bridge program. So we didn't have a bridge program for high school previously. So our students that were in BIP stayed in BIP. And now we have 2 programs next year in grade 9 where students that are in BIP can remain in BIP and be mainstreamed in a bridge program and have that tier 3 at branch from our out-of-district students. So for every student out of district, we're looking at close to 100,000 in services. So just bringing back 13 to that one school alone is a savings of over $1 million next year.
Good. And I want to, I want to continue sort of looking into how the $10 million could sort of be split within PBSD. Go ahead, Dr. Winston.
I just had one question, which is, that has 2 parts, to be honest. The first one is, do we have, and you may have mentioned this, so if I missed it, I'm sorry. But do we had around, over 22, space for over 22,000 students. And this year we had almost 3,000 excess seats. It's projected that we would have almost 4,000 excess seats if that trend continues. My hope is that to the extent that we can convince people to stay in Providence schools and provide a good education, that won't be that won't necessarily be the outcome. To whatever extent we can affect that. Do you have a target capacity figure is there a target capacity figure that we're aiming at? And also, are we planning the buildings, the school buildings themselves, so that each one has a certain level of capacity above its enrollment? So it's not like we have extra capacity, but it's all at one school, and all the other schools are fully enrolled or whatever. Like, are we sort of thinking about that, both the kind of extra capacity that we would like to have and how we're going to how that's distributed across the school district? Is that something that we're having conversations about, or you're having conversations about?
Yeah, so a couple of things to respond to there. And first, I think it's important to reiterate this on the enrollment slide is this assumes that students are staying with us. So again, this is just based on pure matriculation out. So obviously we want to bring more students back, but this is not about students leaving. This is just about we have smaller cohorts of students in our early grades than we do in older grades. So that's one thing. I think utilization wise, there's never a magic number. And I would say we really need to look at it, particularly at different grade spans. And so overall utilization is one number, but we really want to look at it elementary, middle, and high. I think for like planning purposes, as we're trying to think through, this doesn't necessarily apply to all schools, and so this is not a district target. But when we are thinking about utilization, you never actually want to be 100% utilized because one, you have very little wiggle room if something were to happen and you get more students. But you also, as a choice district, you can get into situations where siblings come together and can't, like, we don't want that to happen. So we are typically, and we want to make sure, that you may have extra seats because you are integrating students who are multilingual learners or special education students. So you actually have to, it's not holding seats, but you have more kind of space than you normally would. So I would say in most cases we're looking at, and this is, I don't want to confuse it because it's not really a long-term or district level view, but as we're planning each year, we want to make sure there's wiggle room as we're planning for the number of staff we need versus the number of students we have. I think as we look kind of at that longer term view, it really is about enrollment projections. We've learned we actually, I think some of the earlier projections for this year had us lower than we are now. So we actually haven't seen as much of some of the decline. And so these numbers are great, but you really need to look at them. I feel a lot better about our next year projections. Still pretty good about 2 or 3 years. 4 or 5 years is hard. I think this is probably the right trend, but you need to be able to react and plan for changes. So what I like about our capital planning part is we know what the trend is and that we need to plan for this. If the trend were to accelerate and move up and we were to have a lot of students come back, we will have the seats for that. If it declines in this way, or if it accelerates down, we'll have to make some decisions collectively about what that means for our footprint and portfolio. So a long-winded way of saying, I think you never want to be 100% utilization doesn't work. The one we look on a year-to-year basis is around 90%. But big picture, I don't know if that's the same number, but kind of the same type of thinking. But it's more about you never want to back yourself into a corner where you're going to be way over or way under, and so it's kind of reevaluating quickly each year as you go through to see if this trend still holds.
Ms. Hughes, and the superintendent.
I'll be brief. Please stop me, council, if I've gone off track here. I just want to highlight and emphasize that concept of looking at our buildings as a portfolio. I think that as we are, families, community members, regional school board members, we have particular schools that might be of special interest in us, but as the district is planning, they're looking at the portfolio as a whole. And what I think that I heard a couple of times tonight is that essentially, I have a student who's in 11th grade and his class is way bigger, and his class was bigger in kindergarten than the incoming kindergarten class now. So to me, that sounds like if that seems to be a consistent trend, or one clear enough for you to name here, that when we are talking about our portfolio, we do have to get a little more specific about what we mean. Do we mean our high schools, our middle schools, or our elementary schools? And then we're also, as a portfolio, moving more toward pre-K through 8 campuses and or specific buildings. Campuses meaning like 2 buildings right next to each other, sharing grounds. So I think it's important that we're talking about the specific impacts for one building that's being used as one of several swing spaces as part of a larger capital plan. But I don't want us to lose sight of that portfolio perspective, because when we do this planning, we have a lot of moving parts at the same time. I also want to identify, because I've heard this a couple of times in previous meetings, and I think just naturally it makes good sense that not only are some of our buildings very old, it is very different to try to put high school students in an elementary building or vice versa. Just things as simple as how big is your toilet? How, are your classrooms, high school students are bigger than elementary students. But then also, and to an earlier point, the needs of our students are changing, but the age of our students is kind of shifting as well within that total number. So just, am I missing anything in talking about that portfolio? And please let me know. And then I guess the other thing I want to emphasize again is that I think Mr. Jones touched on this earlier, but just to get maybe a little bit of a refresher or clarity about when a building is taken offline, or when PPSD makes the decision to remove a building from its portfolio, at what point does the decision making about what to do with that space later, does that fall, what role do you have? Is that another question? Okay.
So I can answer the second question first. So, taking the building out of care and control of the district is something we spend, when we made those decisions there, we want to think, obviously it's not a, hey, what do we need for next year? It's like, what do we think we need longer term? So when we make that decision, in most cases it's because we feel pretty confident that there is not need for that building. So when that happens, it ceases, we make the decision, it ceases being in care and control of the district, and then is in the control of the city. And as a city building, they're able to, do and make decisions about how its use is done. So, after it ends up not being, produced by the school department, it is fully within the city's control to make decisions about how it's used.
Superintendent?
I heard the portfolio, but we also, can you hear me? Try again, now, how's that better? Okay, good. So I keep hearing about the portfolios, but also let's think about what's part of the portfolio. We also got to think about the programs that we're offering. So Dr. Stevens also stated that, how do we bring students back? Well, one of the things that we've done is we increased our CTE programs from 5 programs to 28 programs. And coming, and still counting, and still developing those, but also making sure that when we develop these new or like new facilities, that's also sending a message, and as part of our portfolio, sending a message of how important it is to have these pre-K 8 schools where families can keep the students longer in one school, and that's research-based that shows that students do perform better when they're in K 8 schools. That's one thing. But also, that also means looking at the number of students that we have and how do we keep them here? How do we keep them enticed, and how do we keep the families in the district wanting to come to Providence? Because that is the issue right now. If you're saying that there are some students or some other locations that are offering different programs, look at the programs that we're developing and how we bring these students back and maintaining them here as well.
Question to superintendent, has the district, assessed whether leasing the building to a charter operator, for student outflow, like have they sort of had that assessment? Have we had that assessment as it pertains to that? You get what I'm saying?
Say more.
Yeah, so has the district sort of taken a peek at, assessing through a charter operator, the sort of, student outflow, like students that actually leave in the school department and that are leaving? Like, have we gotten like a third party to actually look at that? Because it is its own profession when we look at enrollment numbers and we're saying who may be coming in, who may not be coming in. We can't base it upon, charter expansions, or we can't base it upon, what we think is best or what the trend may be within the next 2 years, because say 5 years down the line, it could change. So have we sort of gotten a third party assessment from anyone? And are we in fact sort of?
Yeah. So we have in a few cases. So through one of the things as we do construction projects, we're obligated to submit enrollment projections done by a third party. So in one case, several years ago, it was done by an organization called Cropper that did it for our facilities decline. In that 2 or 3 years ago, we had, through some of the work we were doing on long-term planning for the district, EY, a consulting company that was helping us with finances, also did some enrollment projections. And so, a lot of those, kind of to reiterate what I shared earlier, are based on a lot of assumptions. And so those projections are typically very accurate the first few years, but they also assume there's questions of even if a charter is authorized, will it open? There's a ton of demographic changes, there's immigration changes that can affect it. So we've had that done a few times, and then when we do our annual projections, we look at kind of the next year changes and we make those into our projections. But we do our own projections, particularly from year to year, but we've also worked with other organizations that have supported those efforts too.
How recent was that?
So, we do ours annually. The last one would have been done in, it was either 2023, so maybe 1 or 2 years ago. I also, we get annually, should have mentioned, from NESDEC, which is the New England, I forget, they're an organization that does projections for many districts take advantage of. So that is something we get annually, I should have mentioned. So the last one we got would have been this fall. That's what we use for a lot of our planning purposes.
Over the span of time, what was sort of like, so they do it annually, but over the span of time, what sort of was they looking at? What did they advise? Was it like 5 years out, or was it just a year out of what it looked like?
In most cases, they look 5 to 10 years out. I think even in my short tenure here of 5 or 6 years, like the numbers can, within that time period, you can be off, the projections can be different by 1,000 students. So, there can be very substantial swings. And granted, we've been through some weird times with COVID and some kind of nationwide demographic decreases. But those projections are often multiple years and also 5 to 10 years out.
Right, so based upon their assessment, is this what the presentation sort of is looking at as we pertain to enrollment numbers, or is it the projection of what the district is sort of seeing as a trend that we're sort of, projected enrollment on?
Yeah, so this one is, the chart you see here is based on NESEC, so that's why that third party, the report, it includes times two, we pulled that out because that's not part of the district, but this is not, we do our own projections annually and we use this as a guidepost, but this is what you see here is the projection based on that third party.
Perfect. Does someone else have a question? Okay, I do have just one more, and then we can move on to the rest of the presentation. Has PPSD conducted exit interviews, family focus groups, or other studies determining why students are actually leaving the district? And what are the top three, reasons families actually are leaving PPSD? One of the main things I want to make clear, me as the president of the board, but also representing the area, I want to make sure that each child, each family, their first, destination is in fact Providence Public Schools. I want to make sure that we get our schools up there. And I think that, every staff member that, works for PPSD should want the same. We always want to consistently improve our schools. So, my question is, what are we seeing as it pertains to what families are saying and why they're sort of leaving the school department? Has there been exit interviews for families to, back that information up?
Yeah, so a few things. Again, I think it is, I don't want to walk past this important point, which is when you have smaller cohorts in your early grades and then you're leaving your 12th graders who are graduating, just through, even if all the students stay the same over 5 years, it's not that you have students that are with us in third grade and leave in fourth grade. It is students that we have smaller groups of students at our early grades, either because of birth rates or because they did not enroll in PPSD. So it's not in the same way, from my other hat with exit interviews for teachers, it is someone who's with us, they choose to leave. Like this is often people who are never here because they were never born or they chose to, they did not enter into PPSD. But go ahead.
So I guess my thought on that would be that that's where it might be important to separate out what's attributable, obviously, to demographic decline. The global population is set to decline in the next 50 to 100 years, and the U.S. population is certainly set to decline, especially if we continue to pursue the immigration policies that we've been pursuing, because not only have immigrants essentially propped up the population of the United States for decades now, it's also very often people who are immigrants who are having larger families and having more children. The middle class birth rate for the United States has been in decline for a long time, and it's actually worse than the birth rates in Europe, right? So we do have a demographic issue. I don't want to pretend that doesn't exist, but the reason why it might be interesting, at least, to sort of see what is our rate of decline and is that attributable to birth rate, or is it that people are moving elsewhere to have their children or putting the children in other schools? It's because it'll give us some sense of how much of that we might be able to influence. And the idea that children aren't being enrolled in the first place doesn't actually tell us necessarily that much, because people may be having children in Providence. So if there's, what's the difference between the birth rate in Providence and the enrollment rate? Are people having children, and then as children approach school age, say, I don't want to send them to Providence schools, I'm gonna rent an apartment in Barrington, or I'm gonna get out of Providence so my children don't go to Providence public schools. So that might be an interesting thing. Like if we could compare the birth rate within the city of Providence, and I don't know off the top of my head exactly how easy that statistic is to get a hold of, but I'm sure we can. And what's the birth rate versus the enrollment rate? Or just trying to parse out a little bit better how much of this is actually attributable to demographic decline and how much of it is a matter of people just not registering children.
But even that example, right? You could have someone who moves to Barrington, or someone because of the schools, or someone who moves because of the affordability of housing. Like I think there's a lot of rich work we could do here to find data, but it is obviously very, very complicated. But there is publicly available data, whatever birth rates are on enrollment that is there that can be looked at that people can use to make their hypotheses on this one.
Yeah, and I think So is Neds, how you pronounce that? Is it NESDEC? NESDEC?
Department council.
Yeah, so if they were to conduct that analysis, say, in the fall, I believe that some of the information they typically look at is birth rights. So I don't know if there's information they probably shared that we don't have. But I believe that they most likely sort of look at all of those logistics, and maybe it's time to sort of reevaluate and look at that and hopefully probably get, something as soon as possible. This is critical information, to receive, in Providence. Now, really quick, just to my original question, have we conducted exit interviews to families as it pertains to why they may not want to be coming to Providence schools or why they are leaving? Because I do see a trend, and I know why, I hear it all the time, why families may want to homeschool, put their kids in charter schools, private schools. But, there is a lot of students that actually do exit out, during, enrollment as they're in elementary and middle school. But are we hearing directly from families? And is that something we should look at?
I mean, I don't think we have that. Yeah, we don't have that information.
I think it would be beneficial,
The data that we collect, from families is what we just did in survey work, that gives us a lot of information, but not necessarily that information.
Okay, yeah, I think it would be beneficial. This is just me personally, because we want to make sure we have retention as well. We want to look at retention numbers. But also we want to make sure that, we sort of, before we say, hey, let's invite different people in, that we sort of have everything sort of in place as it pertains to enrollment. And we're not, just saying, hey, we're giving away space that we could potentially use. So that's just my own thing. Any other questions? All right, we can finish.
I actually think, we're happy to conclude. I think the remaining slides, just because some of the questions we had were on engagement. So I think happy to talk about it at a later point, but it's more about some of the engagement we've done with families and faculty members about specific swing spaces as well as future construction. So there's just a few slides on that people are welcome to read on their own, but probably not worth a ton of additional discussion unless people would like to.
Really quick, does people have any other questions? Yeah, Ms. Hughes.
So I just want to note as well that on this slide deck that we're looking at, a lot of that engagement information and some of the previous slides were from the January 2025 school building committee meeting. That is where a lot of the detailed discussion would happen around any projects related to the capital plan. So I just wanted to flag again on the record for folks that those are open meetings as well. You are welcome to attend those. I believe our next one, since I did not have this information at our last school board meeting, which was shame on me, I believe our next meeting is coming up on Tuesday, April 22nd.
Correct, at 4 p.m. I believe that this one's in the PD Tech room, but no.
It'll be, sorry.
Yeah, I believe it's in the PD Tech room, but no, it'll be across the street.
Okay. It likely will be downstairs in the basement here. If it's not here, it's on Washington Street at 379. So you'll see that agenda will get posted, 2 days out on the Secretary of State's website. And typically it's also linked, or the information about that meeting is also on our main PPSD website calendar. And again, I would encourage folks to attend. There is also a Zoom link for that, so you'd be able to log in that way and attend and participate. That is a great place to get up-to-date information about all of our capital plan projects.
Yes, and I do have a couple more questions as well, but you go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. I just wanted to say thank you to the district for coming and answering a bunch of questions, and also just for folks showing up to a special meeting. I hope none of this comes across as like nitpicky or just like being nosy for no reason, to be completely honest. Like this, it means something, and like we all care about this district and we care about this city, and any time we have real estate that is like coming out of our portfolio, we have to take it serious because it's tied to deeper issues, potentially deeper issues around gentrification and the symbology of even, a charter school sharing a space with a public school. I think that speaks volumes to community about like where our community is potentially headed. And so just making sure that we're doing our due diligence as a board and as a community to make sure we're asking really detailed questions that stem into those values of like, what are our goals around bringing families back and keeping families here and making sure we have enough space for them and that we're not getting rolled over by the gentrification wave that charter schools are also a part of. Not all of them, right? But like that can very much be a part of minimizing the ability for public schools to serve our children. And so, yeah, I just appreciate the district. I know you guys are doing a lot of work and you guys are with us in terms of like that thinking, that line of thinking. And I also think it's important to anytime something like real estate in space is such a big deal, because it ties to all these other issues. And so to be able to sit back and really talk about it and think critically, I just appreciate people's time and dedication to doing that.
Thank you, Vice President. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm sorry, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade on tonight. But I had a couple of questions pertaining to funding. So can PPSD explain in simple terms how student enrollment affects school funding and how funding losses due to the charter transfers impact the district's ability to provide services, especially for special education?
Sure. So I can mark funding. So again, our local budget is state aid and city aid. State aid is based on a per pupil allotment. So based on characteristics of the students, we get aid from the state. City aid is typically based on maintenance of effort. So it's not tied to a specific number of students. So yeah, any changes in students increases or decreases lead to increases or decreases in money. Similarly, the district then typically has to spend more or less money depending on the number of students that are either come or it grows or leaves. So the main driver is on state aid, which is on a per pupil basis.
So what is the per pupil cost that PPSD loses when a student enrolls in a charter school like Excel, or how much of that, if any, is reimbursed through enrollment transitions, transition funding, things of that nature?
Yeah, so
really quick, sorry, do we receive partial payments, like, say a student enrolls year one, do we get a payment, or year two, do we get a payment? How does that look?
Yeah, and I will mess up the exact specifics, but over the past few years, the state funding formula accounts for a transition fund. So based on enrollment declines, that again, they did this in part because it's something pretty consistent across the state, or at least for a number of districts. So I forget the exact amount, but it's like you get 40% of the student loss in the first year, and then a smaller portion in the second year. But I can get the exact figures, but there is a fund that helps account for transition loss because it's not something that is, again, not unique to Providence, but it's happening as well.
Yeah, because I think we hear all the time we have like the financial issue taking place here in Providence Public Schools, and I think if there's an impact in students leaving the district and we're losing money pertaining to that, I think that's more of the importance why we need a retention plan, and we need to get as many surveys out as possible so we're exactly knowing from families why they're leaving. Because what's going to end up happening is, the more we disenroll students out of Providence Public Schools, that money is going to continue to sort of disenroll, and we're going to continuously be in this financial burden and have to consolidate teachers and administrators. And I want to make sure that the schools have the services. Just one other question: how does PPSD calculate or project the long-term financial impact of recurring student transfers on its capacity to sustain important services, particularly in high need areas like special education?
Yeah, I mean, we look at enrollment projections for a number of reasons, some of which is our facilities planning, some of which is our financial planning. So we look at, we feel most confident about our projections for next year. And then we use some of those out years to give rough estimates on how things will change. But again, there's also, again, when you get out 3 or 4 years, a lot of uncertainty both in the enrollment changes, but also if you ask what our funding formula looked like 3 years ago, it would look very, very different. It would not account for this enrollment transition fund. It wouldn't account for multilingual learners. So not only did the number of students in the enrollment change, or the further you get with projections, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's also a lot of uncertainty in many ways. We've seen, I think, improvements in the funding formula to account for that nuance.
And is there a financial tipping point, or a potential risk, by this taking place?
I mean, as someone who works in finance, and I check because, we're nervous a lot for a number of reasons, and not just enrollment, but for all the things we talked about in our budget presentation earlier. Good news we learn, and then challenges, financial challenges that we face. So there's no kind of, there's a number of factors that go into a financial planning. Enrollment is one of them. There's no kind of tipping point at which it's, once you reach a certain point, you're in a lot of trouble, or vice versa. So, we need to look at all of them. And again, you have to spend a lot of your time thinking about next year, but also making sure we're set up for future years as well.
And I think the superintendent has a comment, but that's the reason why I want to circle the retention piece, why it's so important, because financially there's a risk, and I don't want you every year sort of being like, okay, what are we going to do here? And every year, like you've already mentioned, you're going to have sort of a financial impact, and, there may have to be more cuts, or, we may have to make more consolidations. Superintendent?
I just want to make sure that everyone is clear that, we keep speaking about enrollment decline here in Providence, but it's not just in Providence. This is happening everywhere. So, I know we speak about Providence because we're here, but this is happening nationwide. This is not just in Providence.
Absolutely.
How do we compare to other states or even neighboring cities? Do we have a more significant decline in Providence, or is it comparable to other spaces?
Pretty balanced.
Yeah, and we could share this. We shared this in the past. There was a pretty stark that again, I am so focused on what goes on in Providence certainly, but there was when you look at Rhode Island over the past 2 decades, there's been a significant decline in the number of students, and so I think national trends is something we're seeing nationally. I think, if I recall, it's something we're seeing in a lot of urban districts. So we can look at. I think there's. You can look at some of the more recent public data out there about but it is not just a Rhode Island thing or even a regional. I think it's something we're seeing, I think, across the nation.
We know, it's not just a school thing either. As you said, it's an intersectional issue that's very much about housing. It's about schools. It's about quality of life, period, right? It's not just about the school. So we definitely get that, but I think it would be, we know it's an intersectional issue for sure, and that, while schools are super important for why families stay, it's not the only reason why people move to cities and decide to be here, but I do think that would be helpful to have that information, and we can do some of that research ourselves too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to make sure there's a balance, if we are sort of losing students at a pretty fast, pace, that's a concern. But I just want to make sure that there's in fact a balance. I know when the state takeover began, I believe we had 24,000 students. We're now at 19. That's within a couple of years, a large decrease. And I think it's going to be necessary that we in fact get that information. Listen, I am done. I actually have one more question, but I'm going to close my laptop. Does any other members have any other questions on tonight? I do want to also acknowledge, I want to thank PPSD. I've been on you guys' tail for this kind of presentation. It's critical as it pertains to when we're talking about leasing buildings. Best national practices is that the school board has as much information as possible as it pertains to sharing spaces and, sharing definitely school buildings that can potentially be used for other areas, that being brought before the board before it is in fact agreed upon. So I definitely want to acknowledge the district's quick turnaround. I did not want to go into a week of vacation and then we lose, focus on this. There's going to be a lot of conversations around the whole Excel Academy situation. And I want to just make sure that the school board, is at the table and that we're also making critical decisions, because when we are talking about school funding and enrollment trends and all of these different spaces of using, the Kajiro building that is going to be used as a swing space, the board, it's important that the school board is sort of kept in the loop. And this lease agreement as well is going to be out for the next 5 to 10 years. So people may say, oh, the school board doesn't have any power. Well, I'm anticipating within the next 5 years, we will in fact regain that control. So I want to make sure that us as board members are able to have that institutional knowledge. I think I said that right, institutional knowledge as it pertains to what's taking place. So I don't want anyone to think that, Tyrell or as Vice President Newman said, we're just trying to pick in information and get information, but also because I represent the area, we're in this area that I represent, I want to make sure that the community is able to, if they come to me, I'm able to speak knowledgeably about what I can control. I didn't want to speak much about lease agreements, but I definitely wanted to make sure that as it pertains to enrollment trends and potential uses of the space, that was in fact communicated. So I definitely want to say thank you to that. That has given me and the board, I believe, knowledge on what is anticipated. I'll follow up on some of the inquiries as it pertains to what the school board had requested and you guys had promised to send forth to the board. And I think that that's sort of where I am. Any other questions by board members? Being none, I also want to thank our attorney on today. What's your name? I apologize. I'm so sorry.
Jeffrey Dean.
I'm so sorry. He's the lead, city solicitor. So we are definitely appreciative of you coming last minute. And I want to say thank you there. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion's been made by Chairman Jones. Do I have a second? I have a second by Secretary Fox. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. The motion has been adjourned. Thank you and have a good vacation next week.